because we are people, and we are typically resistant to change, as you may have noticed. But you've learned so much. We're going to talk about how you can harness some of this and really move the needle on your business. But first I want to ask you a question. And I ask a lot of audiences this, and there's no trick here, but I am curious to find out, what do you think is the most essential leadership trait that helps you inspire and change your workforce, both in terms of the mindset and the actions people take? Anybody? By the way, the first tenet of bold leadership is speaking up. So, yes?
Commissions.
I'm sorry?
Commissions.
Somebody else yell. Is this?
Commissions.
Commissions. Commissions. Oh, you did say commissions. That is the first trait of leadership. Spoken like a sales guy. Are you by any chance in sales and marketing? Commissions. Okay, very good. Yes, setting targets and reaching them, of course. Who else? Yes. Passion. I agree with you on that one. Passion. Anybody else? Yes.
Trust.
Trust. Essential for making change happen. If people don't trust you, they're not going to follow. Who else? Dialogue, communication, talking to your teams. All of those things clearly. Vision, vision, passion, communication, commissions. All of these things are essential traits for leadership. There's one other thing. What's that? Strategy, vision, exactly. I'll just let you all keep going. You're really good with this. All of these things are so important to leadership. There's one other trait that I happen to think is one of the most essential, if not the most significant, and also the most overlooked in the workplace. And that is a trait that propels some of the great visionary leaders, planetary vision. And to me, it's what propels people like Helen Keller, who, did you know, was the first deaf-blind person ever to graduate from college, Harvard, no less. And then there was Dr. Viktor Frankl, the Viennese psychiatrist who survived not one, but several of the Nazi death camps, Auschwitz and Dachau, and yet went on to take the observations of what helped him and others survive, and wrote an incredibly instructive and inspirational book called Man's Search for Meaning that helped drive change for millions of people around the world. And I will guarantee whoever your personal hero is, whoever that is, a famous person or someone in your organization or your community who's achieved a level of success, this is one of the driving forces. And that essential ingredient that I think is often missing in the workplace is hope. Hope is truly the jet fuel for this journey of life. And it's interesting because when I talk about hope, at first people think this is something abstract, but in fact it's exactly the opposite. There is a growing body of research called hope theory that comes from both the medical and the psychological communities, and now I'm adding to it in terms of the workplace. And it's very specific about what hope is and what it isn't. And I'll give you first the derivation of the word hope. It comes from the Old English, and it's the word hopian, which means to leap forward with expectation. To leap forward with expectation. Now that's really what you're all expected to do in terms of the change and the technologies, the solutions that you're dealing with, and not to mention the competition that you're facing, is to stay ahead of that curve. And infusing your workforce with hope is one of the ways that can be done. Now let me give you a little bit of a sense of what that means. There is a fellow named Dr. Jerome Groopman, leading oncologist, and one of the founders, one of the pioneers of this idea of hope theory. And he believed, as a clinician, an oncologist, he was dealing with cancer patients, and what he would find was that he would often give a prognosis to someone and giving them all the information, which he felt as a young clinician was what you were meant to do. That he would sometimes give them so much information that he robbed them of hope, even when there was a possibility of a cure. So he went the other way, as we often do, the pendulum swings all the way the other direction, and he decided he would stop providing all the facts and all the information in the idea that people would then be more able to rise and help cure, participate in their recovery. And he found that he was giving people a false sense of hope where they didn't have the reality of the picture. So he had to find this delicate balance of giving people a sense of hopefulness in the face of reality. And what he found was that hope was comprised of two key elements: belief that change is possible. Simply that, belief that change is possible. If you think about that, not everyone believes that change is possible. We all know somebody that lives and dies by the status quo. They don't believe that change is possible. So that is fundamental to leadership, instilling that sense that change is possible, and secondarily, an expectation that what you do as an individual can have a direct, immediate, and positive impact on your future. Now you broaden that, and you're also affecting your team, your division, your entire organization. And with some of the people that I just mentioned, they can affect the entire planet. Some of you, I see, are taking notes, which I love, but they're your own notes. However, if you want these slides, they are available to you. I've got a website called libbygilllive.com. You are more than welcome to download my notes and also slides from there. Share them with your team. Take anything home with you that you'd like. I'm also going to tell you a little bit about some of the research that I'm doing and ask for your participation also on that libbygilllive.com site. Now, there's another fellow who was a pioneer in this hope theory movement named Dr. C.R. Snyder, a psychologist from the University of Kansas, who I discovered because he is one of the preeminent researchers in the field of excuse making. And believe it or not, there is a field of study on excuse making. And as an executive coach, I've worked with companies all over the globe at this point. And excuse making is a huge part of the language and the resistance that I have to overcome. Now, the interesting thing is I find often the excuses are true. It makes no difference. You still have to transcend them somehow. So what Dr. Snyder believed was that hope was comprised of willpower, mental attitude, like we think of it, but also not just the emotion or the affect, but also the action, which he called way power, meaning being able to see multiple pathways to success. And if you think about what we all do and what your own teams do, we're not assembly line workers anymore. We are information or imagination workers. There's seldom one way to reach a goal. There are often many ways, and the more you push that down to your teams so that they have ownership, authority, creativity, some mastery, then they begin to see those multiple pathways to the end goal, and your success becomes exponential at that point. Now, what I see in my work is that it's always belief that drives behavior. Your underlying belief is what makes you act for good or for bad, for positive or negative, the way that you do. It can be hard enough to figure out our own beliefs at times. It's near impossible to figure out somebody else's. But if you're trying to make a change in individuals, teams, and cultures, you've got to understand the underlying belief, because most companies have the spoken truth and the unspoken truth. And you've got to be able to put the two of those together. There was a famous Henry Ford quote. He said, whether you believe you can, or whether you think you can, or you think you can't, you're right. So this idea that your belief will drive your behavior is the basis for change and for overcoming resistance, which is not always as readily apparent as you think it might be. What I want to do today is simply look at some of your beliefs and challenge you to think about where your own resistance is. Because if there's something I ask you to do, and many of you volunteer, that you feel that immediate sort of, I don't want to do that, I don't want to think about that, I don't want to try that, that's your own resistance. That's our natural brain's defense against anything new or different. But as you link beliefs and behaviors and then repeat those behaviors, enculturate those behaviors, those become systems. Those become part of the DNA of your company. We're going to talk about what you want to take home with you from this conference. What is that big overriding emotional assignment, the thing that's got your name on it, and how you break that down into some factors for accountability. Because if we all did everything we intended to do, well, we'd all be richer and thinner. but it's very difficult given all the complexities of the business world and the change and the swiftness of change to do all the things that you mean to do or that you set out to do. I want to give you a little context about how I come to this idea of behavioral change and improvement in the workplace. This is me. In my very early days, I put myself through college in Long Beach, California, working as a waitress and on the Queen Mary, that big boat that is moored in Long Beach Harbor. And I got a degree in theater arts and a very useful minor in modern dance. Any other modern dancers here? No. You? All right, there are two of us. And I'm sure it serves you well in the workplace. But nonetheless, I went on and proceeded along my way with my chosen path. And my first job was as a talking Christmas tree, that was me, welcoming people into my local mall, as I did every Christmas, to spend their hard-earned dollars. But I proceeded from there. Things were looking up. I got a job using my dance degree as a tap dancing bear, not Sperry Farm, that's me, the baby bear. I quit after one summer because of the sheer heat of that costume. I don't recommend this, but I got closer. I got my first commercial on my path as a young performer. Yes, it was for a menstrual cramp medication with the crampy, the bloaty, and the fatiguey, and that's me in the middle. I was the bloated one. Yes, I was proud. I got back from there. I went on and was able to finally, after many auditions and classes and workshops and all of those things that you do when you're a young performer, I got my big break. I became the hand model for Fancy Feast cat food. Any of you remember the crystal goblet with the can of Fancy Feast? That was me. Boy, were my parents proud. But nonetheless, I was able to go on from there. And no one will accuse me of being an economics genius, but I figured one thing out early in my career. When I discovered that I was in the top 5 percentile of wage earners in my union after SAG, top 5 percentile, 95% of people were making less than I was, my big year being $12,000, I thought, there's something wrong with this picture. And I went around to the corporate side of entertainment, landed a job working with Norman Lear. Peter Guber, some of you may have heard, was one of my first bosses because the company, Norman Lear was sort of the legendary king of sitcoms. That company was bought by Columbia Pictures, which was bought by Coca-Cola, which was bought by Sony. My theory is you can stay in one place and let the world consolidate around you and have multiple careers. But in 5 years after starting as an assistant, I became the head of publicity, advertising, and promotion for Sony, then moved on to Turner and to Universal. And what I found was that I was really in control of my destiny. Even at a young age, I realized it was really up to me. And I discovered this idea of hopefulness, this flicker of hope, no matter what was happening, no matter what the competition or the difficulties. And hope, by the way, is not optimism. Optimism is an overall attitude, a sort of a generalized sense that everything will be okay. Nothing wrong with that, except for masses of data that will tell you that the pessimists are far more realistic and right more often than the optimists. The optimists are a general sense that it's okay, whereas hope, and this hope theory points to this, it's specific and situational. Hope means you can change despite the reality of the obstacles that are facing you. It is planted in truth and reality. So this is the sense of you can be hopeful about something that's difficult. It's the balance between reality and hopefulness is somewhere in between. So what I want to ask you is simply, based on everything you've learned and everything you're taking back to your organization, what do you feel hopeful about? And I want to challenge you with a little leadership moment. Turn to the person next to you and simply fill in that blank. I'll just give you about 30 seconds. Turn behind, front behind, and just share something that you feel hopeful about. Don't all talk at once.
I wouldn't feel hopeful about We're going to go from the silver ones to the gold ones.
Okay, have you both filled in the blank there? Or if you're sitting by yourself, thought about something that you feel hopeful about? Some of you are so hopeful. By the way, I've heard it all, from ending world hunger to getting a date on Friday night, everything in between. And I invite somebody who's feeling particularly bold and communicative, share something that you feel hopeful about with this room of your fellow leaders. Did I mention the bribes? I mean, gifts? Books for people? Oh, there you go. They have straight up. Yes.
I been told that Mexico is going to win the World
Very good. Mexico's going to win soccer?
The World Cup.
The World Cup. Oh, okay. Mexico. Oh. All right. So that's a possibility. You're facing the reality of the odds, but that's a good possibility. Come get a book from me afterwards. Oh, so you want to come right now? Come on! I'm not going to stop you. You have your book, your choice. You want to stop? Look at this. Right up on the stage. This is the leader. Take your pick. You don't get both. All right. And this is a man who's willing to take a risk. Okay, so let's see, where were we? We're talking about what we feel hopeful about. Because the truth is, in your organization, there's no stasis, there is no neutrality. You are either starving hope, and some of us, we've all had this happen to us, whether it's the door slammed in your face, either verbally, I mean literally or metaphorically, people that don't listen, people that steal ideas. I hear it all as a coach, the credit stealers, all of those things that can happen to us. People that won't entertain our ideas. Those are people that are starving that sense of hope. And there are companies that you can feel it, the energy sucked out of the room when you walk into reception. On the flip side of that, there are leaders among us, and including your colleagues and the people that you work with, who feed that sense of hope. There's something about them that life just doesn't get them down. We know them, and it's not just those big examples. It's those everyday heroes. They may be dealing with financial loss or a sick kid or whatever's happening in their world, and yet there's an enthusiasm, a life, and energy about them. They are feeding hope to other people. So my question for you, because this is specific, it's individual, and it's extremely personal, is how do you feed hope? How do you keep that sense of inspiration, engagement, and enthusiasm alive, even in the face of this whirlwind of technology and competition? I talked to a group of first responders, of paramedics and firefighters and policemen, and one fellow came up to me after the presentation and said, he had big hearing aids, and he said to me, you know, I couldn't be a professional firefighter because I'm hard of hearing. But what I do when there's a fire, I'm on the volunteer unit, when there's a fire, he was from Washington State, he said, I go out to the line with my omelet station. And I don't take just eggs and cheese, no, I take green pepper and bacon and onion and mushrooms and everything you can name, and I make a custom omelet for every firefighter before they go out there to put their life on the line. And I said, well, so you're not only feeding hope figuratively, you are literally feeding hope and firefighters. And he said, you know, it's just something I can do. That was his way of contributing. We've all got a unique and personal way that we can feed that sense of hope. And what I'd love for you to do later is go to libbygilllive.com, and you'll see on the nav bar, you'll see take poll. I've got 3 questions about hope as a leadership trait and the influence of hope on your corporate culture. And just fill that out for me. If you want the results, just email me, and I'll tell you the results of this poll taken from the summit over the course of 2 presentations. Fascinating to me to see the recurring themes building and how people feel about their own willingness to feed hope, but often the lack of an environmental sense of that kind of positive, hopeful atmosphere. When I went to Universal, I was recruited to go there at a time when the company, which had been the most stable entertainment company in the history of the business, with a famous mogul named Lew Wasserman, 50 years at the helm. No other company came close to that in terms of leadership stability. Now, there's good news and bad news with that kind of leadership. It's very stable, very solid, and also incredibly siloed. So I came in at a time when the company had been bought by Seagram's. I know it makes a lot of sense. A booze company buys an entertainment studio. Doesn't matter. I came in at a time where every business unit had changed. The management had changed over the course of less than 2 years, 18 months, meaning new chairperson in motion pictures, television, music, theme parks, consumer products, the whole company. And I came in with the television group as head of communications. Now, my job was to centralize the communications functions because there were 5 different divisions within the TV group. So my first task was to bring all my people together. Amazed me that there were people who had essentially the same job. Vice President of Communications. One was network television, one was cable television, 2 buildings apart, 20 years on the job, had never thought to meet for a cup of coffee or to swap war stories. Incomprehensible to me that the lack of curiosity, but then I discovered it wasn't about that. It was the sense of we don't go outside the bunker. We don't leave our silo. It would be disloyal. It would be wrong. That's not what we do. No surprise that on that studio lot, the executive tower where I worked was lovingly referred to as the Black Tower. And the motion picture building was called Shawshank. Anybody get that reference? Shawshank Redemption, about a prison. That's what we lovingly called the motion picture part of the company, was Shawshank. So that's just how everybody was. That was the downside of this long-term management with very little change. So as head of communication, I thought, well, I've got to get out and communicate. So I started asking anybody that dealt with our television group for a 15-minute introductory meeting. And I could not believe how difficult it was to get people to allow me to get in my little golf cart, which is how we moved around the lot. 540 acres, you had to have a cart to get around, past it was at the theme park, past the Dead Sea and the western town and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, what's going on here? I'm nice, but I'm also persistent. And pretty soon I started breaking down these barriers and discovered that it was, as I mentioned, it was disloyal to the original team, but it was also this fear of the unknown and the swirling change. What's going to happen next? When's the other shoe going to fall? And it took persistence, and it took kindness, and it took building a level of trust in order for people to see that we had shared interests. And pretty soon, after doing things like taking cookies down to the basement where the accountants were, and they said, well, nobody's ever been down here before. But I know, in my math challenge way, those are the first people you befriend. The tech people and the finance people were always the ones I made friends with. And pretty soon people saw that there was nothing underhanded, that we had a shared success in terms of the group. And what my team was able to do, because our task was promoting shows. It's easy the first year when you've got a new show. It's not so easy in the 19th year or the 12th year. So they would come up with ideas like, hey, we've got a new show premiering on Fox. What if we paint a giant logo on the roof of a soundstage? And you've seen those studios. Anybody been to Universal, Florida, Hollywood? Those giant sound stages. Well, Universal's right in the path of all the freeways intersect and the traffic choppers go right over. So we wanted to paint this, about the size of this room, this logo with the air date and the information on a rooftop. And we had to know, well, who do we ask? The studio's facilities guys. Believe me, no one goes to visit the facilities guys who open and unlock doors. But we knew who they were, and they thought, well, this is really cool. We've never done anything this creative before. They were on board immediately. So as we're up there sharing the media reveal and the fun of it, people began to see we had a shared success, a shared celebration, and from then on, things became much easier. That's the kind of resistance that we all encounter in the workplace, particularly when you're implementing change. So here is my leadership language. I like to keep things very simple. Many companies, entertainment particularly, not transparent. Things like employee engagement, those were things that would get you laughed out of the conference room if you had phrases like that. But now, people are much more open to these ideas of let's bring everybody on board. It starts with, this is what's going on in the company, or the industry, or with the competition. This is the situation. Now, here's the plan. You are the leaders. You are the ones who are meant to come up with a plan, which is not to say other people don't have part of it, pieces or input, or all the value they can add. But they want you to lead. People really want a definitive point of view. They want you to come to the table with some instructions for them. And there's an old joke that goes like this. If you're leading and nobody's following, maybe you're just taking a walk. So you don't want to be that leader that's just taking a walk. You want to be the one who comes with a plan and then says, what do you need for your part? What do you need from me in terms of resources, manpower, time? How do I help you get the job done? That's how you get in alignment and on the same page. Then another question, this is a daily question. How do we improve? This is the concept of Kaizen, meaning literally change for the good. Incremental improvement, continuous change. It's some companies breathe it, whether you call it that or not. It is that idea that it's not just a nice thing if everyone on your team contributes, but it is an absolute must that everyone be looking for ways to change. That's that method of Kaizen, that ongoing improvement. I mean, that's why if you go to Libby Gill Live, you'll see I have a rate my speech. I take all of that very seriously. That is my form of Kaizen, as we all have to be doing. Now, sometimes you get the shock with it. You ask for how we can improve, meaning you as a leader, how can I improve? And you've got to be ready for it, because sometimes people hit you right between the eyes. But that's the job of leadership. That's the job of innovation and growth. Nobody woke up at Apple and said, hey, how about an iPad? It's just that series of inventions and small steps that lead to those big prizes. And then there's the celebration. Don't overlook the need to celebrate, however you do that, whether it's a big blowout or a small event or a pat on the back. I think one of the biggest things that is lacking in the corporate world, and I'm happy for it because it keeps me employed, is the recognition and the pat on the back. Sometimes that's all anybody wants. You can look at massive amounts of data. And on the 10 reasons people take a job, money is usually 5 or 6. It's much more about purpose and teamsmanship and feeling like you're giving a contribution, that you're learning. It's all of those things. Not that money's unimportant, and it's certainly not to you, right? But it is also all those other things that make people's jobs important. They want that sense of ownership. All right, so what gets in the way of that is very simple. It's just plain old fear in whatever you call it, stress, change, challenge, another day at the office, whatever that is. It is that human kind of resistance. Our brains don't want anything new. And I don't have to tell you about fight or flight. You know all about the adrenaline and the cortisol and all of that that gets released into our systems. But I'll give you a very interesting study from Emory, from the neuroscience department. They did a study on fear. And what they did is they took subjects and hooked them up to an electrode to get a nice zap. Not lethal, but definitely not pleasant. And at the same time put them in MRI scanners. And what they saw was that immediately a big group of those subjects, the pain centers of their brains were activated. Meaning, it wasn't the pain at all, because there was no pain. It was the fear of pain that set off all those alarm bells. And a whole group of people, even though the shock was going to come in a 30-second interval, you didn't have to wait very long, but many of the subjects preferred a bigger shock immediately than waiting a mere 30 seconds to get a smaller shock, which really was tantamount to, I can't stand the waiting. The fear of what might happen is killing me. Shock me now, get it over with. Again, that's that fear of the unknown. But the most important thing that the researchers found was that when the pain and fear centers of the brain were activated, the risk-taking and exploration centers were deactivated, which means in those times of stress or change or fear, the parts of the brain that you need to call on the most, resourcefulness, creativity, innovation, are depressed. They're deactivated, and you're less able to reach them, which is why things like trust, respect, collaboration are so important, because you keep those feelings at bay. I'll give you another very simple example of the brain's instant response to newness. That's just our high alert system for something that's different. You know, the way you drive to work every day or take the train, however you commute. The route you take, if you take the same route every day, you kind of tune out what's around you. I mean, I drive through LA. I know I stop at red lights, but I don't remember them. I don't remember the stop sign. I don't remember the drugstore or the dry cleaners. I know it's there. But you take a different route that you're unfamiliar with, and suddenly, every green light, every red light, every landmark, you notice. This is your brain putting you on high alert. Danger, something is new out here. This is why realtors change out their signs in front of a house that's for sale repeatedly. This is why those banner ads have to rotate. We tune out things that we perceive as safe, and we interpret things that are new or different as potential danger. So when you take change home and say, yay, isn't this terrific? We're going to change the way we do everything, and then it's going to be your job to change the way our clients and customers do everything. Won't that be fun? And you're met with some resistance about that. That is our body's natural process. What can happen if you let yourselves off the hook, if you give in to excuse-making or fear, or what I call the INR, the immediate negative response? You enculturate this idea of excuse-making, and I hear it in different companies in different ways. And I'm already kind of in tune to what I think is the excuse-making language of this group, but you'll tell me. Anybody ever said or heard, it might take too much time, right? We've all heard that. Whatever the it is, it might take too much time. Money, resources, manpower, whatever, it's not worth it, the time that we will spend. Here's one I hear frequently in retail, and sometimes in banking. I haven't been trained on that yet, right? That would go over really well. Somebody walks into your bank and asks for a loan, and somebody says, you haven't been trained on that yet. Or in any of your technologies. Oh, I don't know that one yet. Obviously, what this typically means, if you hear this, is someone's fear that they are lacking the skills or the competence. This is about, not only have I not been trained, but I don't know if I could do it even if I were trained on that. With change comes a real fear of, I may not have the goods. I've been used to doing it this way for a long time, and frankly, I don't know if I can shift. You sometimes, and it may feel occasionally like coddling, I prefer to call it coaching, you may have to take people by the hand and lead them through this until they build the confidence. And along with that comes the competence, and it's that revolving sort of cycle of confidence feeds competence. Another one, anybody ever heard me never done it that way? A couple times, right? Or the flip side of that, which this one is a little bit more nails on the chalkboard for me. We've always done it that way. God forbid we should innovate. We should take a risk. We should try something new. But often there are companies that say, yeah, we're okay with failure, right? We're okay with taking a big risk, right? With giving ownership to some of our junior people. You've got to decide how far down to delegate, on what terms, and in what specific projects. But if you don't start bringing those people up the ranks, you'll never be out of the weeds. You'll be stuck there. Now, I want to ask you, if somebody can stop me with a new INR, I just want to know, what's your excuse? I spoke to a giant tech company that you would all know, might be some people here in this room, I will not name them, who said, oh, we say we don't have the bandwidth. And I'm thinking, hey, if you guys don't have the bandwidth, and nobody on the planet has the bandwidth. Or my first responders I mentioned said, oh yeah, we say it's not in our territory. I thought, oh great. Hello, 911, my house is on fire. Sorry, not in our geographical district. And you're out of luck. It's not in the contract. It's not in our scope. I did hear one this morning. Somebody said, well, we often say, we didn't invent that here. Does that ring a bell with anybody? We didn't invent that here. Therefore, we are not going to adopt inventions, speaks from anybody else out there, because if it doesn't start in here, we're not doing that. But the world's not working that way anymore. And obviously, there are lots of things that are proprietary. Behavioral strategies are not one of them. You can do lots of things and see what lots of people are doing. That's my book, Capture the Mindshare, was about that brand engagement. How you engage your employees to be that face of your brand. So, what I want to know now is, or what I want to talk about, your own preferences. Because as I mentioned, this is very personal. How we either propel change and we break down resistance, or we contribute to resistance. And sometimes it's just about who we are and how we look at change. And our own preferences, our biases, our baggage, who we are as human beings is what comes with us to the workplace, right? So I want to try a little experiment with you. Just where you are, just clasp your hands together and just look down and see which thumb is on the top. I've got my left thumb on top. And just raise your hand. If you've got your left thumb on top, raise your hand. Okay, now those of you who have the right thumb on top, raise your hand. About 50-50. Some of you have no thumbs at all, so it's really hard. So it has nothing to do with hand dominance, or it would be about a 90-10 split. I often ask, well, sometimes I'll ask for a show of hands from introverts in the room. Make sure you, yeah, people love that. All you introverts, raise your hand, make sure you participate. Or left-handed people, because the world is just not set up for you. And if you are a left-handed introvert, boy, you really got a left over the top. So put your hands back together, and now I want you just to change it and clasp it the other way. That doesn't feel so normal. It feels a little odd, right? Just a little peculiar, but doable. And now we're going to up the ante and look at your preferences. Cross your arms. Just for your sake, just cross your arms. Okay, now I've got my right arm on top, even though I have my left thumb. So raise your hand if you've got your right arm on top. And look around. Okay. Oh, you introverts decided to play along. Okay, now if you've got your left arm on top, raise your hand. Again, when any group splits about 50-50, 60-40, now put your arms back the way they were, just comfortably. Look over at your neighbor, see if they're doing it right. And now, just switch it the other way. See how it feels when you put that other arm on top. It's a little weird, right? It's a little awkward. You just kind of start doing some of that. All right, so now, shake that off. Just put it back the way it's comfortable. And those of you who have your right arm on top, I want to just let you know, congratulations, because you have the natural predisposition for leadership. You are, in fact, more hopeful and more inspiring. No. Nobody was going to, no, of course I'm kidding. It doesn't mean a thing, except this. This is something that you chose at about age 3, and you're not changing, ever, if you have your say. But the interesting thing is, half of the world does it exactly the opposite way of the way that you do it, and yet they feel just as strong and just as wedded to their preference as you do. Which is just my point, is that you've got to take that in and broaden the scope to see how hardwired we are to our own beliefs. We've only got that one lens. We've only got our own set of experience that is made up the sum total of who we are. Now, it is our baggage, our biases, it's all the things we bring to the office with us. I happen to know a lot about baggage. I wrote an entire book called Traveling Hopefully, How to Lose Your Family Baggage and Jumpstart Your Life, about my family baggage, swearing I would let it go. This happens to be my parents. This is my group. That's me on the bottom there, the cute one, with the dimples. And this was my siblings. I was one of 6, raised in the South. Anybody from Florida? I was raised in Florida. If you know the state of Florida, the deep South is in the north. The South is where all the northerners from New York and New Jersey go. And the middle part of the state is all theme parks. So, I grew up in northern Florida in the deep South. My dad was a very prominent local doctor. 6 kids. We were all at prep schools and boarding schools, and we lived on a big estate that had been owned by Harriet Beecher Stowe. It was very idyllic with the country club, and then cotillion, if If you don't know what that is, just ask me later. Cotillion until one day on Christmas when I was 10 years old. And on that day, I went running with my brothers and sisters into the kitchen, to open presents and do all that stuff kids want to do. And there, sitting at our kitchen table, was a neighbor. And even at age 10, when there's a neighbor sitting in your kitchen on Christmas Day, you know something is up. And as it turned out, my oldest brother, David, was home from his freshman year at Princeton for the Christmas break. And as I found out when I wrote my book, Traveling Hopefully, and fact-checked it with my mother, you can imagine what it's like to fact-check a book of stories about your family that everyone has tried to forget for 40 years. I found out that, in fact, my dad had taken my brother out to lunch that day, that Christmas Eve day, and told him he was about to divorce my mother. David went out with his high school buddies, apparently had too much to drink. He died on Christmas Day. And my dad, true to his word, did, in fact, leave my mom and the 5 of us remaining kids to marry a patient. And I don't think I mentioned my dad was a Freudian psychiatrist, leaving his wife after the death of his son to marry his own psychiatric patient. Now, this did not go over as well as you might think in a small southern town. So after a 2-year court battle, there was no no-fault divorce. My dad moved with his new family to Japan. He had sold his business. Our life changed overnight. We lost everything. He commissioned in the Navy and started over again in another country. So I spent my adolescence going back and forth from Jacksonville, Florida to Japan, managing to rack up 9 high schools, including 2 in my senior year. Not something I recommend for your kids. And by the time he decided he was through with that life, we moved back to California. They all moved back to Florida. And I thought, okay, I've had enough change. I'm staying right here. That's when I started putting myself through school. I got the job as a waitress. And eventually, after just plugging away, living on my own, and essentially growing up at age 18, I got a call that day I was about to start Norman Lear's company. So excited, my first real job, insurance, a career path, all those great things about the big job. Got a distraught call from my dad that my stepmother had finally succeeded at something she had tried numerous times. She had taken an overdose of sleeping pills and scotch and committed suicide. So I was called home. My father had already disowned the rest of my siblings. My stepmother's children didn't speak to her, so it was up to me to plan this funeral, which I did, and I know many of you have. And after all of that, I gave everything in close-up shop, gave all her clothing, her belongings to Goodwill and to the housekeeper, except for one thing. My father could not part with my stepmother's beloved full-length mink coat and her little matching hood that I always thought should be something Greta Garbo or maybe Zelda Fitzgerald might wear. But there I was, packing that up to take back to Southern California, what every 20-something kid living in Los Angeles needs, a full-length mink coat. But I took it home with me, stuck it in the closet, and promptly forgot about it. Continued working until one day, in utter despair, I did what a lot of people, but especially young kids do. I went in the kitchen looking for booze. And I wasn't a big drinker back then. But I found a bottle of brandy that my roommate had left behind from some recipe, and I poured a glass. I drank it down. I poured another glass, and then it hit me. I had never tried on that mink coat. So I went into the bedroom, opened the closet, unzipped that garment bag, and put that coat on. Never tried on, let alone own. Never tried on for my entire life. Put this thing on and could not believe how heavy it was. Just the weight and this luxurious or decadent feel of this thing. All I could think was, I wonder how many dead animals it took to make this one coat for this one sad, broken woman. And the thought of my stepmom just floored me, and I was down on my knees. And I crawled into the hallway of our little apartment where it was so dark and closed up. And I stayed there for an entire weekend with my bottle of brandy in my mink coat on that floor. And I know we've all had that dark moments of the soul. And I thought, the idea sort of swirling. I thought, well, I could stay here. Or I can think about all those stuck, broken half people that I've been exposed to. and be one of them or do something about it. And it was almost like, you know, the sleeves were lifting me up, and I got up off the floor and thought, okay, if it takes the rest of my life, and it has, I'm going to do something that is worthy of, I'm going to change. I'm going to make those necessary changes. And that's just to say that we all have those moments. We all have those ideas that we build, these systems that we build around how we're going to change. And to me, it comes down to something very simple, is that you have a vision. And of course, you all have multiple visions. You've got lots of ideas. But if I ask you right now, if you could only take one big idea home with you from this summit, you're not allowed to even entertain anything else. What is that one thing that you'll take home with you? How do you take that change and implement that? And then how do you simplify that path? What do you need to get out of the way, whether it's excuses, the wrong people, anything that's in your way, what do you need to bring in to accelerate the path and take others with you? And finally, how are you going to continue to execute when it gets tough, when you get tired, when you get stressed, when the cash flow's not there, whenever your client leaves, whatever is going on, how do you continue to execute and buoy up all the people around you? And to me, that's really the secret of management, is making that vision so meaningful, so measurable, and also something that's within your control. Stop worrying about other things that you don't have an impact on. Look at the things where you can make a difference. Ask others to do the same. And then the bigger that vision is, even though it's counterintuitive, the smaller the steps needed to get there. Every step you take, every lunch you allow an hour or 90 minutes to, every project that you get pulled into, does it align with that vision? Is it a good use of time? Does it make sense to put your resources, time, energy, money, and people there? What else do you need? And I want to ask you now, if you think about that big vision, what can you do based on everything you've learned the last few days? What can you do within a week? Something that you would not have done had you not been here and learned what you've learned. What can you do within 1 week that is going to make a significant difference in your business? Because it's really about how you make it simple and doable. I'll give you an example about simplicity, because our brains crave that open space that we can then fill up. You know your remote control you've got at home? How many buttons would you say are on that? Did you say 50, 40, 30? About 30. How many do you use?
40.
You use 40. That's because you're a techie. You use 4. You use 4. Most of us 3 or 4. Now, I've learned this from my technologist friends out there, that many of you would call this, because you've got that extra 1/8 of an inch of space, you're going to add another feature. It's called feature creep. So instead of making it easy for us, you've decided, let's add one more button. Let's add one more thing. That's the same way we think. You're already overloaded. Let's overload some more. Another example, a famous study done at Columbia Business School, where the researchers looked at retirement plans that offered options in companies, from 2 to 59 different retirement options from which their employees could choose. They looked at 800,000 employees and 647 companies. And what they found was, the more options were offered, the fewer people signed up for the plans. Completely counterintuitive. And of those that did sign up for the plans, the more options in their package, the more that signed up for the plan, the fewer they became more risk averse. The more options they had, the more cautious they were with their money. So the more options, the less participation, the more choices, the less risk-taking. So when you simplify things for people, they are more willing to get on board and to join you. And that's what you need, because it all comes down to what you take home